Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
Welcome to the Workology Podcast, sponsored by Clear Company. PwC just released its new Future of Recruiting survey, which found benefits do not outweigh a negative recruiting experience. Nearly half, 49% of candidates, turned down offers because of a bad experience. Some other interesting finds from the survey include that, despite the fact that most of us put candidate experience front and center in our recruitment strategies, 92% of candidates say they've experienced poor recruiting practices at some point in their own career. This absolutely impacts your employer brand and your ability to recruit for a future workforce. I'm pleased to have the opportunity today to talk again with Bhushan Sethi. He's the Joint Global Leader, People and Organization at PwC, and he's talking with us about what we should be doing today to improve the future of recruiting. Bhushan, welcome back to the Workology Podcast.
Thanks, Jessica. Great to be speaking with you again.
So let's talk a little bit maybe more about the survey, but let's talk first about your background. Remind us, I know you've been a guest on the podcast before, but talk a little bit about your history in recruitment and human capital.
Yeah, so I advise clients on their workforce strategies and the design and the implementation of those across a number of industries, including financial services. Something also recently that I've been doing is spending a lot of time with policymakers. T20 is an area that is a think tank that's part of a G20, and I'm part of a task force there where we've been influencing different future of work topics, influencing policymakers on those. The latest one that we published a paper on was around workforce productivity. So with all the investments in technology, really driving the adoption of those, really rewiring how we work, really investing in your people and upskilling them, and getting their well-being in the right way to get that productivity that we're all craving with our technology investments, both in the US and outside, is critically important. So I apply my practices to some personal topics that I find really important, like influencing policymakers outside of my client work. And my day job is really working with clients to design and implement some of these solutions.
I love how you're taking a real holistic global approach to everything you do. I think that's absolutely wonderful and so great to have someone who has the knowledge and background in the recruiting and human capital space to be helping and advising those leaders and organizations and also governments as they're crafting their new policy. That's awesome. I love that.
Thank you.
It seems like we spend most of our time as HR leaders focused on improving the candidate experience. But it seems like from the PwC survey results, it's showing that we're not doing it maybe as much as we thought we were. What's the biggest area you think that we're falling short on?
Yeah, and the candidate experience is really important. So a number of firms have invested heavily in technology, and there's bolt-on recruitment solutions, and there's different candidate relationship management solutions they've invested in. But what we're seeing in our survey is that candidates want that human touch. They want that human touch. They want to know where they are in the application process. They want to get feedback on their interviews. So what we're really seeing is, and we were surprised around, is that nearly half of the 10,000 people that were surveyed said that they'd rejected an offer once they got through all the way to actually receiving it because of some element of bad experience.
It finally, I feel like a survey like this really helps us as talent acquisition and HR practitioners be able to go to our senior leadership and say, hey, 50% of those people who turned down an offer, they are turning down an offer and it's because of our experience. So this is the business case to make for maybe increasing our recruiting and HR budgets so that we can improve those areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of those areas I mean, recruitment is the recipient of good planning. So how do you plan for the future? You think about different capabilities you need for your business. You think about different scenarios that if your business needs more data and analytics, if you're thinking about digitizing your business model, or if you need different capabilities in cyber, if you're looking to protect your firm and the assets. So recruitment's a recipient of good planning. Having really well-defined skills and recruiters that can be part of that creative planning process is important. But once you get there, having the recruiters really clear on this is what we're hiring for, this is potentially what we're going to build inside our organization. And for those that we are trying to hire for, and that's really what our survey was focused on, these are hard to fill, very hot talent markets for areas like cyber, data analytics, professional services, etc. Really understanding what is it that's going to make us as a firm unique? How do we attract candidates? So in our survey, we saw that it's necessary but not sufficient. People would trade up to 13% of their salary for more opportunities in areas of upskilling, for example. People chose firms because of their focus on inclusion. So we're seeing that people are making decisions based on who they want to join in competitive talent markets for more than just pay.
Yeah, it's a time investment, and you put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into your career. So you want to make sure that while the money, the compensation, that's a good thing, but what am I going to learn from this experience? How am I going to grow so that I can move on to the next opportunity? Hopefully it stays within that organization.
Yeah, and it's really interesting when we think about when we started our careers, it was not a candidate's market like it is today for a number of people. Me personally, starting 25 years ago, we were happy to get that first job out of college. We were really grateful to a firm that would invest anything around our training and development as part of, say, a graduate rotational program. Now, firms are having to offer that as table stakes because upskilling is so important, not just to people in your organization, but prospective candidates coming in, because whatever skills you possess, whether you're entry-level talent, whether you're lateral hires, you know that the shelf life of those skills are pretty short these days. So everyone's going to have to invest in themselves and have their firms invest in them and drive lifelong learning. So it's just interesting how the recruitment market has changed and the different levers that we as employers and advisors to HR are using.
So if we had one thing that we had to tackle before the end of the year into this new year when it comes to recruiting processes, what do you recommend that our listeners focus on?
Just having good data on the status of applicants. So one of the pieces of feedback that we got in the survey was people don't know where they are in the status. When you order your pizza online and it's about to get delivered, you know where it is, where it goes in the oven, when it gets on the bike, when it gets to your apartment. In a similar way, how do we become transparent with candidates to say, this is where you are, this is when we're likely to fill this role, these are the next steps. So some of the basics of just candidate tracking and being transparent with the communications around those candidates. We hear the term ghosting now has been moved from dating circles to matching candidates and employers to recruitment circles. And again, just having the transparency and the human decency to kind of share that information would be a good basic tactical thing.
It's easier to track your Amazon package than it is to find out where you are in terms of status of employment.
Absolutely.
One statistic that really stood out to me from the survey was that 62% of job seekers said they're more likely to apply for a job where a company is openly committed to improving diversity and inclusion in their workforce. That number jumps to 68% among knowledge workers and 72% in the C-suite. How do you feel like we can do better in our diversity and inclusion programs and just be able to showcase them to those candidates?
Absolutely. I mean, and again, it goes to show that when you think about the value proposition for why someone should join your firm, the reputation and your focus on diversity and or inclusion, I see inclusion being increasingly important in a world that's so divisive, whether it's political, whether it's social issues, whatever it may be, and having organizations that are inclusive and tolerant of different people, different backgrounds, different beliefs, all coming together around a common mission, a common cause for an organization is so important. As we see more and more firms, I mean, diversity and inclusion, has never been more in the public eye. It has never been more on the lips of the C-suite individuals. Yet we're still seeing a lot of people inside organizations say we haven't made enough progress, whether it's on gender, whether it's on ethnicity, whether it's on inequality. I'm actually part of a World Economic Forum task force now looking at social inequality globally to say, how do we look at that as one of the next bastions of diversity? Because equally that's important when you think about the haves and the have-nots. So diversity continues to be important. It's a fundamental piece that candidates look at when they say, do I actually want to spend the next 3 years or maybe 33 years at this organization? Do their values actually align with mine?
Let's take a reset. This is Jessica Miller Merrill, and you are listening to the Workology podcast sponsored by Clear Company. Today, we are talking with Bijan Sethi, Joint Global Leader of People and Organization at PwC. And we're talking about his company's most recent Future of Recruiting survey.
This podcast is sponsored by Clear Company, the fastest growing talent management system on the market, and recently won G2 Crowd's #1 user recommended Winter 2018 award. Visit clearcompany.com
On company culture,
to learn
I thought
more.
it was interesting from the survey that 72% of candidates said that they need to understand the culture of a company before accepting an offer. And I agree that telling them about the organization and the culture of the organization isn't enough. Just a fun video doesn't really give people a real picture of what the culture of an organization is. I wanted to get from you, what are your thoughts on how we could try to better communicate culture to those job seekers? Is it things like open houses and networking events, or is it something more? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so really getting to experience a company, whether you're a passive hire or actively, interviewing with that organization, is where we're seeing a lot of our clients go. So having meetup sessions, having sponsoring events in your community, any opportunity to interact with potential candidates, and then making sure that experience is seamless, that you are that your hiring managers, your recruiting ambassadors, any patrons from your organization are taking this as a marketing event to say, this is what it feels like to work at company X. This is how we interact with people. This is how we talk about social issues. This is how we conduct ourselves in the office, in social events, etc. You get to learn so much about an organization in these informal, many times outside of their own offices, that it just gives candidates a 360 view to, again, do I want to spend my time with these individuals? Do I trust them? Do I feel I have a sense of belonging with them? To me, that would be so important as an employer, when I get to meet people, to really understand their authentic self, to get them to experience me and my team and my firm in many different settings.
So throughout the course of our conversation today, you've said things like human touch. We've talked about empathy. You've talked about people wanting to be their authentic selves and to engage and communicate with each other in that way. When I think about technology, that doesn't always feel so much like human interaction. And the stats in the PwC report support how I feel too. I think that candidates will always want a human experience, but as technology gets better and more intuitive, I think that we also need to be able to scale our recruiting teams. So what do you think about automation in terms of how it can be used to create not a more automated experience, but maybe a more human experience for those job seekers?
Yeah. There will continue to be investments in recruitment technology, whether that's around psychometric testing, whether it's around cultural fit, whether it's around how do you use artificial intelligence to scrape resumes to come up with candidates, obviously with making sure that you're dealing with any ethical, algorithmic bias and data sets within there. So we will continue to see technology. The key thing is we're not stating, and our clients are not stating, that we should not invest in technologies around the candidate or the evaluation or the selection experience. It's at key points, they want human interaction. They want human interaction to understand where they are in the status. They want interaction to say, can I just get an informational discussion with someone so I can really understand their experience? Maybe it's a peer, maybe it's someone in a different department. As you get closer to making a decision and you have an offer, really understanding and reaching out to people there, getting feedback, even partway through interview processes where you get feedback to say, can you share more of this, etc. Even if you get rejected, having feedback. I know that's a litigious challenge here in the US as well, but getting feedback. So the key piece is from the the initial point of the candidate outreach all the way through to a decision and through to onboarding if they become an employee, thinking about where to insert that human interaction is going to be critical. And it may not be the same for everyone. Some people are going to have different needs. So really understanding and personalizing what your candidate needs based on who they are and engaging them in that discussion, we see as critical.
It's such a very different market because 2001, nobody cared about what the candidate wanted, right? The jobs were in short supply. Nobody cared in 2008 either. And so now the model has flipped, and suddenly you're saying we should ask our job seekers, including the ones who didn't get the job, for feedback, and we should think about their experience and what they want and how they want it when we're building out our recruitment strategies. That just, I think for a lot of people might be really confusing or conflicting because they might still be operating in the same type of just recruiting process that they were in 2007, 2009.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's definitely a market where you cannot simply be a big brand and rely on your brand to actually bring yourself in. So we actually started this survey having a hypothesis that big brands win. And actually, the data actually told us a brand is helpful, but it's reputation that matters. So everyone's out there scanning, what does it mean to work at firm X? And how are they actually dealing with social issues? How are they dealing with employee activism? How do they treat diversity? Is it something that they just pay lip service to? What does career progression look like? Can I develop from one area of a business into another? So there's so many pieces around reputation that actually are more important than the brand of the firm, because the reputation can be literally changed overnight based on actions the firm takes with its employees, with its customers, with its suppliers, a leader, ethical issue. And so this ability for firms to now sense and respond and understand and manage their reputational impact, including with their candidates, is of critical importance. The candidates are as important as the employees, as the shareholders, as the activist investors, as members of the community. And again, we're talking about talent markets that are very tight. We're talking about 3% unemployment. We're talking about hard to fill roles. We're talking about 80% plus of the CEOs in our surveys year on year highlight skills gaps as being so important. So that was really the focus of our survey, the 10,000 people. It's on those professional skills, the knowledge work, if you will.
You talked a little bit earlier about ghosting, which I always find fascinating to me, that candidates won't pick up the phone or send an email or a text message and say, hey, this isn't for me, especially when you think about the social media aspect and how really everybody's always connected. And I've been in situations where I have worked for a company or worked with a client, and then I move on to a different client in 3 years, and lo and behold, that same person that I interacted with 3 years ago at this one company is now at this new place. How do you think that employers can help, I guess, these job candidates understand that they need this feedback? Does it start by saying, hey, we want feedback, we need to know where you're at, and we feel so strongly about it that we'll give you really great feedback and status updates? Do you think it's like a respect thing, or is it deeper than that?
There could be a myriad of reasons why this is taking a longer time, or candidates are not hearing back from an employer. But the key is just transparency, to say, we'll share with you where we are both in our business and our workforce planning process with our location decisions, and also where you are in that. Another interesting, Jessica, around transparency is something that's very close to my own heart is I thought by now we would be much more comfortable with transparency as a perspective, as a candidate. And so what I mean by that is people would be willing to trade some of their own privacy. So we asked a question about, would you share your social media profile with a prospective employer if it meant you got better opportunities? Half of the people said they would. So what's really interesting is in a world where everybody is being much more transparent about their activities online, you mentioned before, shopping or whatever it may be, only 50% of people are actually willing to give up some of that transparency, some of that privacy, with a prospective employer. You can also argue that everything that we do now is surveilled by somebody somewhere. So there is a whole sector of people that say we actually don't have any transparency, so we're not actually giving up anything. It's a little bit of a myth. So what's interesting there is, from a transparency perspective, you just got to know your audience. You've got to understand, what is it a candidate's looking for? How do I understand the personas and the behaviors and traits of a certain group of people? And how do I engage and ask them to say, if I do want to understand you a little bit more and want to be and we want you to bring your authentic self to work, would you be willing to kind of share information? And we just gave social media as an example. Maybe in the future, we could actually be sharing references. We could actually be sharing references in a more meaningful way to say, if you've worked at 3 different companies and I know people in my network, instead of me reaching out to people that you tell me you want me to reach out to, I'll just choose 3 people from my network. Again, that's the art of transparency. We see it in many other online platforms. To what extent will people be willing to trade their privacy of giving reference, of saying, choose anyone from your network to vouch for my prior work experience and my cultural fit? And again, today it's social media, tomorrow it could be other things, but the broader piece is one of, do you want to be transparent? Do you want to trade some of your privacy? And the key thing is, not every candidate's created equal, but just engaging them and trying to understand them will be important.
I love of how you're positioning this, because not once did I hear you say employee review sites and bad feedback online in reviews, because I think that's where a lot of people's head is at. Like, oh no, this bad feedback is on this review site talking about me and my experience. But what you're suggesting and the strategy is much bigger and broader. And if you are transparent and you have respect and you give people regular updates and share information into the process, that problem potentially of like bad reviews or angry people saying things on social media about you, in theory, it will likely disappear or it will decrease dramatically because you're taking a more transparent approach in everything that you do.
Absolutely. Anyone who's not, quote unquote, failed in any part of their professional life is probably, 1, not trying hard enough, and 2, hasn't definitely learned from the experience. So in a world where there's much more open data around where people have worked, what they do, how they have been a fit for certain companies in terms of their culture, what their professional and technical skills are, in a world where there's much more transparency, some of the data that you mentioned could become noise that goes away.
I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us again today, but I wanted to ask you one final question. What do you think is the single most important factor that we should focus on for the future of recruiting and our efforts to be more successful?
So I'd say, again, recruiting is only as good as your ability to plan for the future, to really say, what are the skills and capabilities and knowledge that I need going forward? How do I understand if I need to double down on data and analytics, if I need to get really focused on strategic marketing, if I need to have world-class cyber certified individuals? And then you actually say, do I need to actually go hire those? Or do I need to either redeploy or upskill them inside? So that critical moment actually happens between planning and then the decision around, should I be hiring or upskilling? More focus on that would be a real important strategic imperative for companies. Once you're clear on who you're trying to attract and hire, then just focusing on the candidate experience and thinking about the elements of where do you insert humanity into the process, where do you give much more transparency, and what does a candidate actually want? What would they prepare to trade, whether it's around inclusion, flexibility, training, and making sure that you're designing your rewards to be broader than just base and bonus.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for taking the time to talk with us. Where can people go to learn more about the survey and learn more about PwC?
Absolutely. So the survey is on our site, pwc.com, the future of recruiting. You can go there. Feel free to follow me personally on my Twitter. It's @Bushansetti1, or feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, we'll link to all three of those things so that you can get access to the survey and then connect on social media as well. Thank you again for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you, Jessica, and happy holidays.
From candidate experience to technology to reputation management, having this kind of data from real candidates is a gift to our industry. It really shows us where we could be falling short and what we should do in terms of change to move forward. I really appreciate Bushan and PwC for taking the time to talk with us about the future of recruiting. Thank you for joining the Workology podcast sponsored by Clear Company. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill. This podcast is all about the disruptive workplace, and we're challenging the status quo. So next time, visit all our podcasts, and you can connect with workology.com to learn more about our previous Workology podcast episodes and guests.